it's a review of Together. It works quicker if you snort it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Well, today we're going to be discussing or debating Together. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. Movie recommendation time. So, Mandem, what's the best recent thing that you have seen?
So a couple of weeks back, me and Daniel had a discussion about Fraser, which is, one of those like legacy series that was brought back, renewed for more seasons. And in that review, I talked about Dexter Resurrection that had just come out. So I didn't watch Fraser, but I was like, oh, I'm a little bit concerned about Dexter. They brought it back. I had really fun memories watching that through uni. I was like, you know what? Because you said Fraser was good, I was like, let me take the leap of faith. And pleasantly surprised. Like, this is a very, very, very solid season of Dexter. Now, again, it's not anything amazing. It's not like the best story or like the most well acted thing, but it just brings back some of the feels of, I wouldn't say the early seasons of Dexter because I think they're still gold, but some of like the kind of like mid to like later seasons where it's not sort of firing on all cylinders, but it's still producing a very solid story and a very solid season that you're just like very happy to watch because it's like easy TV and it's like nothing too challenging and you're getting like a real feel for the character again and like who he is and like, why you fell in love with the show in the first place. There's a lot of callback to the earlier seasons, so you probably do need to watch Dexter or have an understanding of Dexter to sort of know what's going on because it does reference a lot of people and a lot of stuff from the old season. But it's great. It's great. If you have watched Dexter and you're questioning whether to jump into the new seasons, I would recommend it.
I watched the first episode of the first season. It was cool, and I kind of like those type of films, but it was a bit too hard to watch the second episode of the second season, so I feel like I just kind of like... a similar reaction to watching Breaking Bad. I'm nearly finished Breaking Bad, by the way. It's amazing. So I think I kind of need to just kind of like firm the first season of Dexter to kind of get into it fully.
Are you talking about the like actual first seasons from the mid 2000s?
The actual first season 1 of Dexter. Because I saw obviously the new season was coming out, and I was wondering what, like, I saw the synopsis was this is my kind of stuff, my kind of film. So I wanted to watch it again. Started to watch it, but then obviously watched the first 2 episodes. Okay, yeah, it's going to be a hard watch. I can't lie. There are moments and bits which I like, but it's just, I don't know, just kind of similar feeling to Breaking Bad. I feel like it's a very slow paced type of thing.
I mean, I was hooked from the start with Dexter, but yeah, I think some series it takes a little bit of time to get into it.
Okay, so for me, I watched a film called Bloodline, which I would recommend everyone to go and watch. It's kind of similar to Dexter. It's like the film version of it. Pretty much this guy, I think he's a psychologist, I believe, and goes after the abusers of the children that talk to him during obviously his therapy sessions. And of course, his storyline is also affected by child abuse. That's where obviously his revenge killing, vigilante killings come from. Pretty basic, but this is kind of like my niche. I kind of like these type of storylines. So yeah, if you're also the same, I'd recommend that one. I'm pretty sure it gives a similar vibe to Dexter as well. But Dexter seems a bit more sinister. With Dexter, is he doing it for the right reasons?
Yeah,
he's a killer who kills killers, right?
Yeah. So okay, he's got the right motives.
I watched Waiting for the Barbarians, which is a 2019 alternative history movie, essentially. So the idea is essentially it's in a fictional world, and there's an empire that kind of resembles the French Empire, and it's kind of got an outpost in some kind of desert country that looks a little bit like North Africa. But like the context is completely fictional. The story follows kind of the governor of this outpost, who kind of exists on the edges of this empire, and he kind of runs the place in a fairly casual way where nothing ever really happens. And there's this this local woman who is attacked by soldiers, and he kind of takes her in, helps her recover, and he brings her back to her people. And that sets off a sequence of events where his superiors back in the capital kind of get wind of this, and they start punishing him for it, leading to a point where he's been removed from his office. And that happens in the context of this empire kind of running a campaign where they try to extend their control of this area. They kind of completely underestimate the resilience and the response from the locals, and they kind of get defeated and kind of have to retreat. And there's kind of like two plots. The first plot is kind of the fate of this governor, who basically is this completely naive guy who gets caught up in kind of the political machinations of this empire and is essentially being punished for being a halfway decent person. And then you've got the political angle, which is this empire that basically tries to pick a fight that they can't win, but they do so out of arrogance and overconfidence, and that then has kind of a ripple effects. It's kind of hard to summarize because it's kind of two very different plot lines, but they kind of are kind of like an overall allegory for kind of imperialism and how a country can be militarily powerful but still fail to actually be in control of the things they think they're in control over, and how that can have a backlash that does a lot more damage to them that they basically invited. It's kind of the overall summary. What's interesting about this movie is it stars Johnny Depp and Robert Pattinson, and nobody has heard of this movie. It's made less than $1 million at the box office, and I kind of found it on a streamer randomly. It looked kind of interesting, and it's not an amazing movie, but it's a good movie, and it's certainly well made, and it certainly tells exactly the story it kind of wants to tell, and it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. So one of the things that I personally didn't like very much is that this governor is kind of a very naive person who behaves in ways that are kind of not very believable. But the entire thing is caught up in this big allegory for this is kind of like how an empire can kind of choke on its own arrogance, essentially. And so it does what it does and does it pretty well, but it's also got some serious flaws, but it's also a lot better than its box office success would suggest. And for some reason, it came out with fairly big name actors and nobody cared. It is worth at least looking at, if that sounds interesting to you. And that's why it's my recommendation of the week.
Cool. I bet. I'm going to check out the trailer to that. Well, it's time for the main event. Together, Danny G, please give us one of your special synopsis.
So Together is a 2025 body horror movie, which involves this mid-30s couple who kind of buy a house in a rural area, and their relationship is kind of in a rough spot. They've been together for a while, they've gotten used to each other, and they kind of have this anxiety about what if they're making a mistake, staying together, but they kind of move into this small town in the countryside anyway, and there they encounter a mysterious force that kind of begins supernaturally merging their bodies, right? Kind of against their will. And kind of that kind of plays out in contrast to their relationship issues and their emotional issues they have with each other. And kind of things unfold and escalate from there. So what did we think of Together?
I will start off by saying it wasn't a bad film. I just had a okay experience with it. I wasn't angry at my experience, and I would like watch a film like this in cinema. So my experience with it was pretty cool. And apologies, I'm using generic terms to kind of like explain my reaction to this film. However, the feeling that I got from watching this film, there were moments, definitely with the body horror, where I felt like, oh, okay, this is making me feel uncomfortable, which is good. This is what you're going to get from these type of films. And in the generality of things, it's like, okay, I'm in my head, I'm thinking to myself, how does the body horror kind of like contribute to the story? Like, is it necessary, or is it just there for shock value? So I think that's kind of like the main question you're going to ask yourself when watching this film. With the main storyline, I do believe it was necessary. That was kind of like used as a vehicle to, convey obviously the themes of the film. So I do feel like it was necessary. I wouldn't say that it amounted to nothing, but it didn't feel as significant as I wanted it to feel when obviously the revelation of how the film resolved pretty much, and the resolution of the film, and the kind of like the revelation of the mystery. But like I said, if I felt like it lacked significance. We'll speak about it more, but overall my experience with this film was okay.
I think I'm the same. I think I'm like, I'm not mad that I watched it. I'm not mad at the movie. I think there's decent elements to it. I think, things like the relationship between the two main characters in this was pretty cool. That might be as far as like the things I really liked about this movie. I don't think it was great horror. Like, I know the morphing or like the sort of creatures that they show in this are a little bit weird looking, but I don't think the horror was really that amazing or really anything that was out of the ordinary. The concept of the two people merging and morphing into one was interesting and was new, was unique, but I don't think it was that entertaining once we really kind of got into it and once we really understood what was happening. There are a few like dumb moments in this as well, and a few things that I kind of questioned how it works or like, you know, why it works like that. I don't know. Overall, I just kind of feel like it was just like, you know, a very okay movie that you're not going to be mad that you watched, but very forgettable. And, you know, one that by the end of the year, I probably won't remember that I watched because it was just fine. It was just, yeah, okay. I think that's the best thing I can say. Like, I have no strong opinions about this movie.
That's because I'm hoarding them, the strong opinions.
Oh yeah, go
So,
no, shoot.
all right. So, my thoughts on the movie are basically I like a whole bunch of the pieces. There's several scenes in this, especially kind of as the merging of them progresses. There's some neat shots and there's some neat ideas. There's some genuinely creepy scenes in there that we can go into. So like moment to moment, I think there's some good stuff in here. I think the characters are extremely unlikable. Like I did not have any sympathy for them or any interest in their story because Tim especially is just not a person I have any kind of sympathy or can kind of relate in any way. And so their entire conflict and the problems they have with each other before the horror begins is just not something I could really get into. And then the story itself is very allegorical. And if you want to make an allegory like this, it has to work. Like different pieces have to kind of all be part of this bigger picture that you're trying to convey, and they have to work in concert with each other. And I don't think they really do in this movie. And the reason for it is that there are like the villain motivation is pretty underdeveloped. The logic of how the two sides, like the personal relationship and the supernatural body horror, how those two relate, I don't think sings at all. Where there are some parallels, but they don't really move in the same direction. They kind of vaguely resemble each other, but I don't think they're actually part of a bigger allegory. And I think that is what this movie is trying to do and needs to do to be really convincing. And pretty much all of the parts in this are kind of underdeveloped, like in terms of how the allegory progresses, how the villain is introduced. I kind of enjoyed most of the parts, but then at the end I felt unsatisfied, and I thought about it for a while because I couldn't quite put my finger on why this movie was so frustrating to watch. And I think what I've landed on is it doesn't have a point. Like, I don't think it does. Like, I think it kind of orbits like this idea of merging and togetherness and separating and fear of separation and all of this. But it doesn't quite have a point. It doesn't have a punchline. Like, ironically, the pieces should come together and merge into a bigger whole. And they don't, I don't think. So let's talk about it.
So, body horror. The way that it was used to kind of like represent obviously the themes of the film, which is obviously codependency, unhealthy relationship, and obviously other themes which will the other themes of true love, what that looks like. Do you feel like the body horror that was used for this enhanced the story, or it was just like I said, it was unnecessary, heavy-handed, and obvious?
I'm having a hard time really summarizing this because there's like a whole bunch of different disparate pieces here, right? So like obviously they have this relationship. They've been together for what, 10 years? They are not really happy. They're not really unhappy. They are afraid of getting married and like making it official or taking the step where they formally intend to spend the rest of their life together as one unit, right? And they're afraid of taking that step, but they're also afraid of separating because it's not like there's no passion there, but it's also not terrible, right? They're kind of tired of each other, but they don't hate each other, right? It's kind of the bottom line, right? And then you've got this magical force pushing them together, and then that's kind of a wake up call where they're kind of shocked out of their like daily routine, and now they are at a point where they kind of physically can't be without each other, and it's perceived as a threat and as a danger. And then it's revealed that there is like a mystical energy that is doing this to them, and they kind of instinctively try to stop it, but they also don't want to separate, right? So it's kind of like this very muddled metaphor here where I'm not sure it really comes together to actually say something, right? Like where it's like you kind of instinctively recognize that those two things are similar, right? The relationship stuff and the body horror stuff, they're kind of similar. They're about separation, togetherness. As this progresses, you see a lot of not necessarily shocking, but like memorable scenes, right? And all of these special effects, and the curse kind of progresses like from one stage to the next, and it gets increasingly desperate and urgent and whatever. But I don't know that those two things really speak to each other, right? So that their attempts to stop the curse is not necessarily reflected in the attitude of their or how they perceive their relationship, for example.
And I think where it was touched on a little bit, but not expanded on, was when Millie has come out of bed. I think she's like done sleepwalking, and then they're like sat across the table, and he's trying to explain to her what he thinks is going on or what's happening or whatever. And she's kind of like doesn't believe him, flips him off, and then goes to leave. But then she like physically can't, because mentally or in his feelings, he doesn't want her to leave. And in that particular moment, I think, you know, the whole dynamic between the relationship and sort of the whole body horror and the horror element of it, I thought we were gonna really delve into that a little bit more and like really kind of explore that sort of type of like connection, and whether it, you know, they were like the perfect match or the perfect whatever, and how that would like impact sort of them the body horror aspect of it. But I feel like it was just like just in that moment, and then it kind of like behaves differently afterwards, where, you know, those like inner feelings that they have doesn't then sort of, you know, have any influence on what's going on with the body horror element of it.
In the beginning of the movie, you know, like they're at this party, at this farewell party, and Millie proposes to Tim, right? He's kind of shocked and he doesn't have an answer, or he doesn't have an immediate response, and it's all very awkward. And later that evening, they talk about what that means and whether they should separate. And Millie says, the longer we wait, the harder it will be for us to separate, right? Meaning, if we're not meant for each other, then we should pull the plug now, and that will be overall better, right? And then towards the end of the movie, I think it's when their arms are merging and they need to cut themselves free using the electric saw. She says the same line again, but essentially, like, I think he's hesitating, and she says, the longer we wait, the harder it will be for us to separate. It's the exact same line. It's repeated. And I think there's one or two others that kind of do the same thing, right? Where it's creating a deliberate connection between the relationship and the curse. And that is the part that I'm not sure really works.
When you say that's the part you're not sure it really works, are you saying it doesn't work because it's obvious, or it doesn't work because of the way that, you know, they demonstrate, obviously, not demonstrate, but how the way that they convey that theme?
I think what it comes down to for me is, the thing about their relationship is that it's not quite what they wanted, and they're not quite as happy as they expected to be, but they still love each other, right? So they're not actually trying to separate. They're kind of trying to work it out, and they're trying to find a way to live together, right? To be together. But then when the curse comes, that is something that they want to, like, where they want to separate. So it's kind of the opposite dynamic. And the reason they merge in the end is Tim does it against Millie's will and consent, because she's bleeding out from an injury, and the only way to save her is for them to merge. That is why it happens, right? They don't change their mind about, oh, we actually should be together, we should actually be one. Like, he's doing this because it's the only way to save her. She will die without it, and he will have to live without her if he doesn't do this. And so giving into the curse is the lesser evil in that moment. And it's portrayed as a kind of a desperate last resort, right? It's not like they changed their mind, or this is actually not a curse, this is actually a blessing, and therefore we should just do it. Like, we've been fighting it instinctively because it feels like a curse, but actually it's a good thing, and we should do it after all, right? The story could have gone there, but I don't think it did. I think when they actually merge in the end, it's like, if you want to loop this back to the relationship, there's a bit like staying together so that one of them can keep the others a health insurance, right? Like, you believe you should separate, but for the sake of the other person, you're staying together, but you don't actually want to stay together. That's kind of the metaphor that's going on here. And those two things seem to be, like, unless I just didn't get it, those two things seem to be kind of opposite. And the movie doesn't really played as a tragedy, right? It plays it as it's kind of bittersweet. Like, this is not what they wanted, and this is kind of tragic, but because they are willingly walking into this, it's not turning them into a monster, it's turning them into something good, like something healthy.
It's tricky. So the reason why it's tricky, kind of like to say if you're right or wrong, is because the way that I viewed the way that the curse operated, I thought, for example, especially with the way that the end result, the way that the film ended, I thought to myself, okay, each of them kind of like have a void that needs to be filled, and then once it's filled, that's when kind of like the curse will turn into a blessing, which it did. Because for many people, obviously, we saw, well, not many people, we only saw two examples where that curse actually didn't really work for them. Obviously, we saw in the cave where obviously the couple was like, well, one was dead and the other one was still alive, but their merge was completely disfigured. And obviously, you saw the other guy, I forgot his name, but where kind of like
Jamie,
yeah, where so his
the neighbor.
yeah, so his partner merged into him really. So obviously that merge, that fusion didn't really I'm saying work. Which is why I was a bit confused, because with with Tim and Millie, the way that the curse operated for them was kind of different for the way that the curse operated for the other cult members, because they willingly wanted to experience that true connection, but it didn't work for them. Whereas for for Tim and Millie, they didn't. But still, the curse was pushing for them to unite. So that's why I was a bit confused by how the curse actually operates, which is why I'm a bit like, if you understand why I'm a bit kind of like, I can't really give a definitive answer regarding your question, because like I don't really know how this curse kind of like operates. Like, what is its purpose? If that makes sense, I know that its purpose is true for that true connection. I know that, but at the same time, it's like what are the rules? Which kind of goes back to my point that I made about the void. At first, I thought the reason why the true curse worked for Tim and Millie is because their the void that they had within each other was filled. Because at first I felt that Millie was kind of like not more into Tim, but they loved each other, but Millie was kind of like seeking Tim's love. And then once she kind of like finally got that in the end, and once Tim's void kind of came from like not and he was just in like a confused space in a way. But once he kind of realized that he really does love Timmy, that's why I thought, okay, both of their voids were filled, and then that's why the curse kind of like worked for them. But then I was still confused, kind of like how the curse kind of operates. So that's why I don't really know how to answer the question.
The curse seems to be fairly straightforward. Once you ingest this water, it kind of starts pushing you together, and there's like this many-step process of that ends with the merging, right? And the reason the two hikers turned into this monster is because the guy killed himself mid-process, right? And that kind of corrupted or twisted the merging. And then you've got Jamie and his boyfriend, right? Where, yeah, it sure seems like he absorbed his boyfriend, right? And it doesn't, like, at least based on the pictures we see in the wedding video we see, it does not seem to be like he's the result of the merging. And where it really works is for Tim and Millie, where because they both decide to go through with it and don't resist, that's where the merge is successful, right? So that seems kind of fairly straightforward in the sense that if you don't interfere with the process, it will happen.
But they did interfere with the process. I know that kind of like the curse is straightforward in that sense, but I meant in the sense of like, how does it operate if the others were willing? Okay, well, you now reveal that one of them ended up killing each other, but for the boyfriend, for example, them two, they were definitely willing. We obviously in the video, you know what I'm saying, they were both willing, but then it still ended up being, the fusion just ended up being like a travesty. You know what I'm saying, it didn't work. Whereas for Tim and Millie, throughout the whole process and just throughout the whole journey, and they were fighting against that curse. Of course, they got to the point near the end where it's like, you know what, they gave kind of like not gave in, but they needed each other. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of like when the kind of like curse kind of like triggered and activated, and I get why it ended up being successful for them. However, the way that it ended, like the revelation, obviously when the girlfriend went to the guy's house in the forest, that kind of, for me, that's why I got a bit confused. Because I said, okay, they're willingly going to kind of like giving themselves up to this curse in the cave or whatever, but it still didn't work for that couple. So
Well, no, that's not what happens. Like they fight it, they try everything they can think of, and
No, I'm not
then
referring to that. I'm referring to the other couple, the gay couple.
okay, but we don't know anything about them. We don't know how it progressed, and because they were members of the cult, that suggests that they did this willingly.
We saw what he looked like when I don't know how the hell we ended up seeing what he looked like when Millie ended up punching him, but it looked like he looked disfigured.
I don't remember that. Like he just seemed to be a regular person.
But the scene, I'm sure he looked disfigured when obviously he stabbed when he kind of like stabs a Millie in the arm, and then there was like a quick shot of his face, and it looked kind of disfigured. I'm sure. Maybe I was. I don't know. Maybe I was daydreaming, but I'm sure it looked disfigured.
I don't know. I don't remember that. But the point is, they stop resisting in the final stages of the merging, and that is why it works, and that is why the transformation happens.
Oh.
So, but the thing is about the metaphor is, it doesn't like their relationship seems very one-sided. They're not two broken people who complete each other or who kind of are better together. Like it's like Millie seems to have like her problem seems to be that the relationship with Tim is not what she expected, right? And Tim is the one who has all these problems, right? He has kind of he's got the baggage from his parents, right, when his father died, which kind of parallels what happens in the movie, and we can talk about that in a bit. And he's also the one who's completely dependent on her financially, the whole thing about the driver's license. So he's not carrying his weight, right? And he does not seem to really help out with anything that she needs. So I don't really see them kind of like two halves of the same thing coming together. It's like a larger piece and a very small piece kind of merging. You know what I mean? Like it does not seem to be a case of they both have their problems and they both are better with each other. And when they realize that, that's when the merge happens.
I was gonna say how I probably see it a little bit is it's not that in that present moment of the movie that they were perfect. It was more that they once were, and it was kind of both of them losing sight of that. And this is where I agree with. Like I think the endings are just a bit sudden, and there isn't really a strong punchline. But they kind of reminisce on some of the earlier days. Like they play like the Spice Girls like vinyl when they're merging. I think they talk about like how they were like wanting one thing, but actually this is why like it was like how why it worked in the first instance and stuff like that. So I don't think it was like two kind of like broken pieces kind of coming together towards the end. I think it was just a case of despite everything that's happened, this is why it worked. It was like originally working or something like that. Which again, I don't think the movie does a really good job of like really executing that idea, for me anyways.
It's a little bit muddled, right? But there are a whole bunch of pieces where Tim is the one who is attached to her, and he's more of a nuisance to her than anything else, right? So when like Jamie comes to visit and they have dinner, there are these frustrations coming out, right? Where I don't remember exactly what is said, but essentially it comes out that Millie is very frustrated with constantly having to kind of look after him and kind of help him out, and he's not contributing anything, to the point where he feels trapped because he needs essentially her permission to go anywhere because he can't be bothered to get a driver's license. That's one example. Then there's the whole thing about the train where they are not pulled towards each. Like when he decides to go on this gig and he's waiting for the train, and as Millie drives away, he experiences this pull, right? They're not pulled towards each other. He is pulled to her. Similar thing happens when he's in the shower and she goes off to, I don't remember where she goes, but she takes the car somewhere into town to get something. And he's in the shower and he is being pulled towards her. Like every time the car turns, he's thrown like from one side to the other in the shower. And I think that scene was kind of cool, like where there's this magical link between them and he doesn't understand it, and it's kind of just like he's kind of powerless to like there's a whole bunch of things about that scene that are kind of cool, but it's still him being attached to her as opposed to them being attached to each other. And I think that is like there is a scene later on where Millie is pulled towards him, but it's much weaker and it's much shorter, and just by runtime almost all of it, like I would say upwards of 90% of it, is him being pulled towards her because he needs her.
But this is where like the movie doesn't really explain how the curse works, because from my understanding is that he was the only one that drank the water in the cave. We didn't see her drink it, and the only time that she's pulled to him is after she's gone to Jamie's place and he offers her a glass of water, which one can assume was the same water that Tim drank in the world, because like he's kind of ingrained in this like cult like religion or whatever like that. So because once she'd been there, once she drank, that's when she was being pulled towards him. And this is where there's like a disconnect between sort of the narrative that they're trying to tell about the relationship and this whole like horror element where it's not really bound together really well. And like my other question about it is, how does the curse decide who you're meant to like merge with? Because if it's like two complete random people that drink the water, what happens to those people? I mean, we saw with the dogs, and we don't quite. I mean, there were two different breeds of dogs, and I don't know what the relationship was between the dogs. And of course, they can't like really have the dogs speak and explain the relationship. But it's not really clear whether it's just like two people that drink the water then kind of like come together and merge, or is it like you're attracted to like the person that's like most whatever. I don't know. It's just like too many question marks for me, anyways, on how it all operates and what the rules are.
I think there's at least an implication that this whole story about soulmates and you are being rejoined with your other half, right? You want to begin with, and you are basically like, it's a mistake that you were separated, and now the magic kind of rejoins you. That whole story that Jamie tells about like this Plato thing, there's a sense there that is just a story. That what's actually happening is that this thing just merges stuff. What I would point to support this is that when you are inside the cave, everything is just merged with everything else. Like the pews are melted into the rock and people are merged together and they are part of the rock. And like it's all just one big thing. And that seems to be what the entity is doing. It's just merging everything. And this religion kind of was built around this idea of merging pairs. But if you continue this, you could probably merge more. It's kind of the impression I get. But it still doesn't really match to where they are in their relationship, right? Another thing that doesn't work at all is everything about Jamie, right? So he, like in the 60s, there was this new age cult that sprang up around this spring, right? Whatever it is. And it seemed to be a fairly big thing in the town. Jamie seems to be the only survivor of that, right? And that is because there was some kind of storm or something that caused the church to be destroyed, but he is still around. So apparently he was the only one who survived this. And also these bells that are kind of the symbol of this religion are all over the place, and nobody else in town seems to know. It's already part of the problem of this movie is that there like nobody else in town exists. Right, there are exactly 3 people in the cast, essentially, right? I think the town feels very small and very artificial as a result, and that kind of ties into this idea that it's very coincidental that Jamie is a teacher at the same school, and he's the neighbor, and he's the last survivor of the cult. And I don't think it's entirely clear that Tim and Millie were set up, right? Because it's not like Jamie sends them on this trail, right? Like Like Millie asks about hiking and says, "Hey, we saw this trail," and Jamie says, "Yeah, it's nice. Go hike it," right? But I don't think he pushes them towards this specific trail in order to get them to the spring, right? So it's all very coincidental, and Jamie's motives are very fuzzy because he seems to want them to merge, but he doesn't seemingly do anything to make that happen, and he doesn't seem to do anything while it's happening in the sense of nudging them along or encouraging them to do it or anything like this, right? And then when Millie goes to his house, the exposition video is just running that shows kind of this wedding ceremony from 60 years ago, and he has this big speech about cosmic order and greater good and all of that. That's kind of where it stops. So that was the other thing, like why spend so much time on this character when he doesn't do anything really, like to really push the plot forward and really play an active role in what happens to Tim and Millie. Because at least as far as I remember, Everything that happens to Tim and Millie is kind of an accident, right? Even in hindsight, I don't really see any clues that they were set up or that it's a trap or like Jamie is trying to revive the cult or is trying to get people to, like, even with the other couple, I don't recall any clues that that was Jamie's doing. It just sometimes people hike in this area, and it's coincidence that this other couple did this fairly recently, but there doesn't seem to be a plan, right? There doesn't seem to be any agency behind it. It seems to be entirely an accident. But if it's an accident, why spend so much time on Jamie's backstory? Like, what exactly is the fact that he is the survivor of this cult that did this on purpose? What is happening to Tim and Millie by accident? Like, you know what I mean? Like, none of it really fits together. There are a whole bunch of pieces here that could be something, but it feels like they're not joined up.
The only thing that he actually does is cuts Millie's hand with whatever ring that he has. And again, it's not really clear what the significance of needing to cut like the wrist or like slash the wrist, because they do it in the wedding video, and then he does it to her, but we don't know what the significance of it is because the cosmic power or like whatever the entity is already trying to force them to merge, and you've already seen like the hands kind of go together. So for me, it just seemed like a convenient plot device to finally get them to merge by the end of the movie by having her have this injury that needed to be treated. But again, it's like there was no like real significance to the story or to the plot or like the narrative as to why they needed to have the wrist lit as opposed to just it happens to Jamie and his partner however many years ago, and then he just does it to her.
Yeah, and you can imagine things, right? Like Jamie could try to resurrect the cult, or he could say, well, the cult is dead, but like this is still a wonderful thing for people to do, and you have to do it against their will because they will thank you later, but in the moment they will fight it, and so you have to nudge people to put them on this path. Or he could be uninvolved, and then when Millie comes to him and saying like all this weird stuff has been happening, then he can explain to her what is going on, and then maybe she or they like Tim and Millie together have a choice to make on what they want to do, for example, right? So there's there's a few different ways to kind of insert Jamie into this story, right? And they don't really do any of them, right? Like I felt very like it was very disjointed when like the big reveal comes in terms of who he is and what he's been doing or how he fits into that, and that he's part of that cult and all of that. So yeah, I think that's a huge issue. Is it important that he's such a nice guy? As I was watching it before the big reveal, before we knew about who he is, they're laying it on very thick in terms of what a nice guy he is, right? Even making him gay means making him non-threatening to Tim, right? Because it looks a bit like he's coming on to Millie, but then it's revealed that he's gay, and so therefore he's not a threat in that sense. But he's still very forward, he's still very open, still very like excessively friendly. Even as you're watching it, I think it comes across as suspicious. Like clearly there must be an agenda. But then it's not revealed that he does have an agenda. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think the way that he was portrayed made it obvious that he had something to do with, or he had some type of dealing with what was going on to them. Because one, he was in the movie too much. Two, there wasn't that many characters or that many other people in the movie. And three,
But he's
like
the
you
only
said,
other character, right?
yeah, and like you said, he just came across overly friendly. And again, in these movies, it's like typically the person that's overly friendly seems to have like something that they need to hide or some type of like dark secret that they're keeping. I just discovered this in the revival series that I was watching in episode 10, where there was like a similar type of reveal for one of the characters. Him being overly nice does contribute to the cult-like kind of like element of it, because you can almost kind of like interpret the ending of the movie where Tim and Millie have finally merged, and then I can't remember whose parents it is come over, and you almost get like that element of they're going to do it to their parents as well and kind of get them to merge, even though the movie doesn't really show what the cult members are meant to be doing to like get them to merge. But it kind of gave off that vibe of kind of cult like, trying to like welcome people in, trying to like keep people comfortable, trying to like win people over essentially by his niceness for me, I think it was necessary in a better told story.
The new person, right, that the merged Tim and Millie certainly seems very non-threatening, very nice, very normal, right? And we see them for like 1 second, so there's not much to go on, right? And it's entirely possible. Like I think the one big clue is that they have the bell on their door, so it does seem like the merged person is then part of this cult, right? To the extent that it still exists. You mentioned cults, right? And cults do something called love bombing, which is when you first join a group like this, you are met with excessive niceness, and people validate you, and they're happy to see you there, and everything you do is awesome, and they shower you with attention and acceptance and approval. And over time, that becomes more conditional, right? Like over time, you learn, or you make the experience that more and more is being asked of you in order to maintain this level of acceptance, right? And then before you know it, you are fully embedded kind of in the power structure of the group. And that is not something that happens here, right? I think that comes back to Jamie doesn't do anything at all. The thing you said about how when he hands her water, that could be infected water, I think that's likely, although I didn't see a clue there. Just the timing works out, right? That after that, Millie starts experiencing the pull towards Tim as well, right? But that's kind of it. Like there's nothing else he kind of asks of them, or where there's like a sinister side to his niceness in that way.
Maybe you can kind of look at the, I wouldn't say like intrusiveness of the conversation that they were having when again they were kind of like going back and forth over the dinner scene, and I can't quite remember what he said, but he was kind of almost like being like a peacemaker in that situation, or like trying to like highlight the positives essentially. But
he certainly tries to de-escalate, right? But that is still within the realm of, hey, you're at these people's dinner table, and they're kind of fighting kind of while you have to watch. And I think anybody would try to say something de-escalating at that point, right? It feels like there's something missing. It feels like they had an idea for these cool scenes, right? Like one scene that was really creepy is when Tim is downstairs. I think he's at the laptop, right? And then Millie kind of comes up to the glass door, and you can kind of see her shadow, and she's kind of sleepwalking against the glass door. That's a pretty creepy scene. When she wakes up and he's eating her hair, that's really creepy. There's also like the saw scene where they have to kind of cut themselves loose as they're merging at the arm. There are just a whole bunch of scenes. But I have this feeling that they had the idea for the scene first, and then kind of tried to write a story around it, and that part didn't quite get there because it ends up not, like, the pieces end up not coming together.
I think the biggest one is the one where he's eating her hair, because that one just kind of doesn't, again, like how we see the curse work, it just kind of doesn't make sense why he'd be like doing that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. It just kind of doesn't make sense. I don't know. There's a lot in this movie. I think as we're just having this discussion, that just like, just kind of doesn't make sense. Just way too many coincidences. Like, the whole falling into a cave and drinking random water in a cave that you found, just kind of like stuff like that just doesn't make sense, and just isn't what people would do. Just kind of trust water in this kind of like world that you're in, or whatever. I don't know. I don't know, man. I think the movie, I think the movie just relies on too many coincidences. I think, had some ideas as to what it wanted to do, but didn't piece the narrative really well around it. And then it just kind of like makes a movie where, like, again, this is why I say I don't feel too strongly about this movie, because it's like you say, like, for the most part, like, a lot of these pieces are fine, but it never reaches a high point for me at any point. It never really like does anything extremely well, or like goes anywhere where I'm like, super interested, or it's like, oh, like, there's a big reveal. And again, I don't know, like, how do we feel about the entity, or like the sort of evil whatever winning in the end? I mean, it's not super uncommon, because like there are like, Final Destination at earlier this year where our protagonist did die in the end, and the entity did win. But I mean, in this movie, did that work for you? Or like, because for me, like Jonathan said earlier, it just kind of felt anticlimactic. Probably the biggest thing that I was like maybe most disappointed with as well was the fact that Tim and Millie didn't work together to try and understand what the thing was, and that could have like fed into the relationship and like their dynamics and how they work together and this, that, and the other. But it was more so just him trying and her just kind of like rejecting sort of like the idea and just like kind of being fed up with him or whatever. But I just kind of felt like that would have been a little bit more interesting to watch, and I felt like that would have been a better movie for me.
Yeah, it would be poetic if they have to come together in order to separate. That would at least be something where you say, okay, yeah, I can see what you're doing. Another thing is the thing about Tim's parents, right? Where his father committed suicide and his mother could not bring herself to accept it. And so she lived with the corpse for days, to the point where the house smelled of decomposing body. And Tim was basically walked in on that and was essentially traumatized for a long time. And that then is paralleled with the hiker couple, where they are beginning to merge and the husband kills himself. And now you have a living woman carrying around a dead man because of an action he took. And she's kind of stuck with him. There, it's kind of this agonizing existence as this deformed being that kind of exists in this cave and like does not like is clearly suffering, right? So that looks like a metaphor, but don't ask me what it's about. And then we have a similar thing with the rats, where you have these rats who are kind of tied together, who have died in the ceiling, and that is also spreading the same smell. And that is kind of what brings back the story of, you know, like of the parents who can't let go of each other, similar to how the rats can't let go of each other. And that leads to an unhealthy situation that is ultimately toxic, right? That's ultimately unhealthy. So there is symbolism going on here. I'm just not convinced that it really goes beyond the obvious symbolism. You know what I mean? Like it seems like a piece, and apparently that part is autobiographical, where the writer, I think, has said at some point that he lost his father under similar circumstances, like not like this, but he lost him at a young age, or like something like that, right? This comes from somewhere. It's not just random weirdness. But in the context of the story, there's like this image being repeated, right, of kind of the woman being burdened by the man because of his shortcomings in some way. Like if you're really zooming out, like really, really high level, that is what it is. Like that happens like 3 times, right? Happens with the parents, happens with the hikers, happens with Millie and Tim. But then it ends in a way where the man imposes this union on the woman in order to save her, which seems like an inversion, but does it mean anything? Like, is there actually a point being made, right? And I think in order to be really satisfying, to be really good, like a movie like this, kind of the pieces have to come together and have to kind of make a point at the end. And I think the point is what's missing. Like, as I was walking out of the theater, I kept wondering, okay, like, it's not like I hated watching this, but what was the point? Like, what was being said at the end? Because it's not really seen as a tragedy, right? Like, it's like a last-ditch effort to save Millie, but it's also not really seen as a horrible thing. But it's also clearly what they've been fighting the entire movie. But outside of the need to, like, if Millie wasn't bleeding out and did not need saving in that way, I don't think they would have come to the place where they said, maybe we shouldn't fight this. Maybe we should become one. Maybe we are better together as one. You know what I mean? Like, that part is also missing. So, like, all of these pieces are kind of, it's like somebody scattered 20 pieces on the table, and they don't fit together. And you can kind of see what image they're kind of trying to form, but they're not actually pieces of the same puzzle. They're parts of 3 different puzzles that show a similar image. How's that for a metaphor?
Thinking about it, I think also, which is pretty obvious what I'm going to say, but it was kind of like to show what, the force will look like in physical form, and what it will take to, and obviously like what that, true connection looks like. And obviously that true connection looks like near the end was obviously technically Tim giving up his life for the dying Millie, and Millie giving up her life for Tim, even though she was dying, but she still kind of like saved himself from killing her because she was dying. So that's, in a way, they're kind of like, they're kind of like dying for each other in a way.
But he makes that choice.
Yeah, he makes the choice.
They don't talk it out and come to that choice together. And that is what they do to survive. Like, there could be a tragedy in this, right? If they've been fighting this the entire movie and they've tried everything, medicine doesn't work, like force doesn't work, what, like they didn't find a magic cure, whatever, and so they say, this could be worse. Like us having to spend the rest of our existence together as one being is not what we wanted, but it's also, it's not like, if they really love each other, then on some level you could say, like, this is kind of what they wanted in the first place. You know what I mean? Like it's not like this, right? It's not like they come to a decision. Tim does this kind of out of desperation because they decided to kill each other, but he can't bring himself to watch her die.
But I think
like something like that.
That was intentional, because obviously the movie was mainly revolved around Tim and how kind of like that force affected him early on in comparison to obviously his partner. And I think that was done because obviously him kind of like making that decision rather than discussing it was an act of selflessness. And the way that the relationship dynamic was, it was more so his partner Millie was kind of like being selfless throughout the whole relationship, where she's kind of but she is looking after her partner because she loves him. So I think that was intentional. I think that kind of like that build up to him kind of like making the decision for her was intentional to show that act of selflessness.
Yeah, so basically she's been selfless the entire movie and now it's his turn.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a build up to that in
maybe.
a way.
It's an idea. Doesn't feel quite right. Like, it does not feel like, oh, now it all falls into place.
No, I agree. Like I said, I also walked out of there thinking, what's the point as well? So that's literally the best way to describe my feelings. Because before I said my feeling towards the film was okay, but that's actually that's the best way to describe it. It's like, what was the point behind what was going on?
And that's the difference between the plot level and kind of the allegory level, right? Like, the plot level makes perfect sense. Like it like I can follow the events, right? But then what's the bottom line of the story as a whole? Like what is this about? Like, what is being said? And I think that part really feels half-baked, right? Like it's just not thought through, and they needed to kind of revise a little bit and kind of make the pieces line up. Where in the end, like, ultimately what really matters is where Tim and Millie are at psychologically, right? Like what they believe and what they feel and what they feel about their relationship and about each other. And that should be reflected in the choice they make in relation to the curse. Like, that is how that works, right? And that is what would be satisfying. That part is missing almost entirely.
Yeah.
All right, any other thoughts on Together?
The last thought I probably would just mention is, did you know that Tim and Millie were actually a real couple in real life?
Yeah, I knew that.
I had no idea.
And I've seen some comments about why, if that's the case, why are they so awkward around each other? And that's either really good acting or something weird is going on.
That's funny. Well, I think it's time for last thoughts.
I think I hate this movie now after our discussion. No, I don't hate the movie because I don't have strong opinions about it. But I think I've disliked it a lot more after this discussion. I'm just kind of like, what was the point? Like, what was we trying to say? Like, if the whole like element of it was meant to be like this like allegory about like this relationship, then I'm kind of missing the point of all of it. And it's just like, this is a bit whatever. And I kind of hate coming out of a movie like that, there where you feel like it should be saying something or it's trying to say something, and you kind of just, it misses the mark. And I don't think it missed the mark by a lot in what it was trying to say. So I don't know. It's kind of frustrating. But again, like I said, it's a movie that I'll probably forget that I watched in a couple of days. So for me, it's a bit like, who cares? It's like for me, it's like either you watch it or you don't. Who cares? It's not a movie that needs to be part of your list for the year. So for that reason, I'll give it a 4 out of 10.
For me, I will say that I still feel the same about the film. I still feel like the film was okay. Like Hervé said, what was the point? I think that's just kind of like the main sentiment that we have, a universal sentiment that, is like we just didn't understand the point of the film. What was the point of the film? So I think that's just the main problem. But besides that, I think it wanted to achieve when it comes to like the whole shock value.
I've done a full 360 on this movie over the last 24 hours. When I first saw the trailers, I didn't want to see it. Like, it looked obnoxious, it looked uncomfortable, but not in a good way. And then when kind of we picked the movie and I went to see it, as I was seeing it, actually, this, I'm kind of enjoying this. Like, the characters are unlikable, and they do a bunch of like obnoxious things and all of that. And there's a bunch of tropes in here that just are not fun to watch. Like this whole Tim being a massive man-child, just not interesting to me. It makes me very hard to care about him, and it makes it very hard for me to care about her problems that result from putting up with that. It's just not off to a good start. But then, kind of as the movie went on, it kind of grew on me, and I think the body horror is reasonably creative and weird and gross, and that's what it needs to be. It's not the best I've ever seen, but it's also not the worst. And then at the end, I'm kind of left with this void of what was the point. I think that's the part where we all agree on that. It's like there's clearly metaphors going on, there's clearly symbolism going on, and I don't know that it adds up. Sometimes now there's this metaphor about how the pieces in a car's engine all go in different directions, but the car still moves forward. Meaning different pieces can do disparate things, but it still amounts to something that's being accomplished, right? And this movie is not like this, right? Like this movie is very much, I can kind of see where the writer's head was at every step of the way. And a lot of the pieces are okay to quite good, and then they don't come together. That's ultimately the bottom line. So for me, that's 0.6 Cronenbergs.
I think I've seen somewhere that this movie was heavily plagiarized or something like that.
Yeah.
Kind of. Do you have the story? Do you have the?
I have the story. So what's happening here is that somebody wrote a script that is essentially the same story, pitched it to the company that produced this movie. The script was immediately rejected, and then a couple of years later, this movie comes out. And there's an ongoing lawsuit with this. And the allegation is that they read the script, said, hey, this idea is cool, let's make this movie by ourselves without having to pay whoever pitched the script. The defense says this was an unsolicited script. The people involved didn't even read it. It was just rejected automatically. And also, they applied for funding before all of this happened, and they submitted a draft script that basically shows that this story existed before that script was sent in. So that is kind of the facts that I know, and the trial is ongoing, and it's up to the lawyers to figure out like what the deal here is and whether this was actually plagiarized. And there are other cases where there are suspicious coincidences, right? Like look up the story between Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine, where somebody pitches a show to a studio, they reject it, and then shortly thereafter they make a show that has a whole bunch of similarities with that show. This looks a bit like it, but there's counter arguments as well. You can take the basic idea, like even if people took the basic idea and then wrote a new script, whether that's legally plagiarism or not is one question. But like you can come up with similar ideas, and there are older stories that kind of tap into a similar idea of like lovers merging, right, through body horror. And it's up to the lawyers to figure out whether or not this is actually plagiarism and whether anybody is at fault.
Well, I hope the scriptwriter ends up winning that case if it's proven that they plagiarized. I hate when stuff like that happens.
If he did, then like he should be found guilty, right? So, but it's like I don't have an opinion about this. It's like justice should be done, and if they rip this guy off, then they should get compensation. One thing that I kind of waded into this a little bit, just as you look up opinions about this movie, it's impossible not to read about the lawsuit, right? And people are very quick to pick sides. And in general, people need to kind of get it into their heads that these people who make these movies are not our friends. We don't need to pick a side. There's not like a couple that gets divorced and you can stay friends with one of them. You know what I mean? Like, it's not personal. You can just let them figure it out, and they made a movie, and you can like the movie or not. But there's no need to pick a side, and there's no need to get invested in a theory of what happened. Like, I do not care whether or not this was plagiarized. I do care that justice is done, but I don't care one way or another what the verdict is like needs to be. And a lot of people are very quick and very eager to get really invested in this and really like get emotionally attached, where they are rooting for either like a guilty verdict or an innocent verdict just on the basis of what makes them feel good. And that, I think, is a mistake. This is like a business dispute, right? This is not important exactly. Like, it's important that the trial comes to a fair and accurate ruling, but it's not important that a guilty verdict is reached or an innocent verdict is reached, right? So that's kind of just my bottom line.
All right. Well, guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode.
If you reach this part of the episode, As always, we appreciate your support. Of course, if you like what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we're chatting a bunch of nonsense, then you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. We will see you next time. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye bye.